between the hills, facing east upon the sea, is the gem of all our northern coasts, a home for you and me. For whenever I gaze from Bronx to Park, looking out upon the land, I can see the beauty of our home shining bright against the sand. I've seen a lot of foreign countries and outback places I've been, and you'll know that I will never leave Coffs Harbour by the sea. The ocean is clear as the sky above as sailing ships sail by. Fishing trawlers are tied up tight, waiting for the morning light. And spreading to the north and south as the highway winds along, folks do travel from other lands to enjoy our golden sand. I've seen a lot of foreign countries and outback places I've been, and you'll know that I will never leave Coffs Harbour by the sea. Foreign countries and outback places I've been, and you'll know that I will never leave Coffs Harbour by the sea. Yes, you'll know that I will never leave Coffs Harbour by the sea.
Before the white settlers, it is believed that the North Coast Aborigines enjoyed the best living conditions in Australia. There was plenty of food and regular rainfall in the Coffs Harbour area. Early in the 1800s, pioneers headed north from Sydney and Newcastle, hoping to make a home for their families. They firstly settled on the New England Plateau, then because they could reach new land by rivers, the Clarence Valley and the Macleay River area. These early settlers were keen to have a farm of their own. It was nearly impossible to become independent. They had no money, no ploughs, no cattle or horses. They had to build a place to live, but they were determined. They worked long hours and worked hard. Cedar was a much sought after timber, and the first people to arrive in the Bellinger area were cedar cutters. John Kofs was a qualified shipbuilder from England. In 1835 he migrated to Australia. He designed and built a ship that could cross shallow river bars, and his reputation grew. He earned this reputation crossing river bars on the New South Wales north coast. He would often shelter from bad weather behind Muttonbird Island. This area became known by the ship crews as Coffs Harbour, and they often sheltered there. When a government surveyor by the name of Greaves made a detailed survey along the north coast of New South Wales, he named the island shelter Coffs Harbour. It was a standing joke with the sailors who often called there Captain John Kofs, Mr. Koff. The name Coffs Harbour was never changed. All ships flew their flags at half-mast in respect for John Kofs when he died. From the mid-1800s, many settlers were arriving on the New England, the Clarence Valley and the Bellingen River areas. Coffs Harbour was overlooked because of the high mountains, and it was completely bypassed. The coast road stopped at Fernmount, and to travel further up the coast, a road went to the Clarence via Ebor. The Bellingen River Valley was thriving. The river was used to its full advantage, and the farmers were able to get their produce right into Sydney via coastal boats. The imported goods could be unloaded at the wharf at Bellingen. Walter Harvey arrived in Fernmount after leaving Nova Scotia and took on a job as a bullock driver. He was 19 years old. He ended up buying the team and continued working it just north of Raleigh in the Bongal forests. Walter learned from Aboriginal friends there was a lot of cedar up the coast from Bellingen. They said there was a river and an island close to the beach. He decided to have a look at it, and then decided to take his bullocks there and cut the cedar. Walter arrived in Coffs Harbour in 1865. He had to cross the creeks and headlands with his bullock, and he had to cut his way through the bush on the north side of the Coffs Creek. He then made his camp near the present-day showground. Cedar timber is light and floats. He was to float the timber to the creek mouth and load it onto ships for Sydney. Cedar was in big demand for rowing boats and furniture, coffins and staircases, and it was also very easy to cut. Cedar trees are evergreen trees with short, sharp, needle-like leaves. The seeds are in a cone. The wood is red and has a beautiful sweet smell. Coffs Creek is quite large considering its closeness to the sea and the small catchment area. The mouth is free of obstacles and cedar logs could easily be floated through it. Going up the Coffs Creek, after a wide area that opens a few sandbars, it then opens into a deeper, narrower stretch of water. This continues to where the Coffs Harbour showground now is. The Coffs Creek winds its way towards the mountains, but it narrows where the highway crosses it. At this point, Walter decided to set up his camp and roll the cedar logs into the creek and float them to the mouth. After getting them through the surf, he would help load them onto a waiting ship. He had to square the logs to stop them rolling on the ship deck. Young Walter would get half of what the ship's captain could sell the cedar for in Sydney. The other half would cover the freight. It was hard work cutting down the cedar, sawing it into lengths, and then squaring the log and working on his own. The arrival of the ship was always looked forward to. Walter returned to Fernmount and Bellingen and married in 1872. Fernmount was the business centre of the Bellingen district, with shops, government offices and 2 hotels. To grow bigger, the town needed more land, but the farmers in the surrounding country wouldn't sell it, so Fernmount faded away. Bellingen became the main centre. Walter retired and returned to Coffs, where he lived out his remaining years. Walter Harvey had led a very active life. Enna, Walter's wife, was 92 when she died. Enna had 15 brothers and sisters, and she had 12 children to Walter. John Carroll was the first to build a home for his family in Coffs. Not long after that, Herman Reek set up a farm at Karora. Solitary Island Lighthouse was opened in 1880. It was first talked about in 1856. The house had to be self-contained, with water tanks. Even chooks and goats lived on the island. The oil-burning light burned continuously for 95 years, from 1880 until 1975. The only time it was extinguished was when several ships were torpedoed during the Second World War. There were wrecks along the coast, but the worst one was the loss of the steamer Killawarra. The Helen Nickel was run into by the Killawarra and sunk in 7 minutes. 48 people lost their lives. Only one lifeboat could be launched, and it saved 25 passengers, all men. Only one lady on the Killawarra survived. After the settlement at Port Macquarie was established, seaborne trade grew rapidly. Settlements grew along the New South Wales coast. The only easy access to these places was by sea. No ship likes to be near the coast in bad weather. With the introduction of steamers, the risk was less, but getting over bars and the strong winds still made shipping a risky business. The worst disaster was the total destruction of the Catherine in 1895, when 77 people drowned. The Catherine sank in 30 metres of water off Seal Rocks. She was carrying a lot of gold. Much of it was recovered. The ship was caught in a big gale with very big seas. She struck Seal Rocks and sunk quickly. 22 people did survive. More ships have met with disaster along the New South Wales coast than anywhere else around Australia. In this area, over 1,000 ships have been lost, and over 3 times that amount have been salvaged and put back into service. Shipwrecks around Solitary Island. The Lady of Lorne in 1889 off Moonee Beach. The Grecian Bend 1892 off Woolgoolga Lake. The Buster 1893 off Woolgoolga Lake. Saucy Jack 1893, 2 miles south of Coffs Harbour. The Fitzroy in 1921 near Foster with 30 drowned. The Aurora 1881 off Solitary Island, 21 drowned. Beaver in 1851 and no trace, completely lost. The Belmore in 1893, he was going from Sydney to Bellingen, lost, no trace. The Buster in 1893 off Woolgoolga. The Carrywell wrecked at Coffs Harbour. The Aurora 1895 Woolgoolga. It was travelling from the Clarence to Sydney, was lost off Woolgoolga. The Port Phillip went down in 1848 in Solitary Island. Restless in 1872, it disappeared near Solitary Island. and the Wyong in 1901 was wrecked on the Solitary Island. During the Second World War, the Wollongbar was torpedoed off Crescent Head in 1942. 5 survived, 32 lost their lives. The Nimbin in 1940, it hit a mine, 7 lives were lost. The Ormiston in 1943 was torpedoed, but it managed to reach Coffs Harbour. The Coffs Harbour and Woolgoolga jetties had both been finished by 1892. They had 1 line and a 5-ton steam crane. Urunga was also a busy port, and a breakwall had been built in 1893. In 1883, after discovering gold-bearing quartz, Edward Sharp and his brother pegged out a 6-acre claim. A village with a hotel, store, school, butcher shop soon sprung up. As mining began, the population of Nana Creek grew to 150 by 1894. There was lots of problems getting the ore to Sydney to be crushed. Bullock teams were used to get the ore to the Coffs Harbour and Woolgoolga jetties. One day, a slowed light of ore took off down a big hill, pushing the 16 bullocks ahead of it, killing them all. The transport costs were high. Blasting powder was hard to get as coach drivers refused to carry it. The local farmers supplied vegetables, meat and milk. About 300 ounces of gold were produced each year until 1890. The Nana Glen village didn't grow, and the mining warden's office was moved to Karamba in 1896. Gold could be exchanged for goods and food until 1941. In 1893, a depression struck Australia. Sawmills and buildings stopped operation. The Taylor boys were timber cutters from Woolgoolga. The boys decided to look for gold, and they walked from Woolgoolga to Herman Reek's farm at Sapphire and stayed there overnight. The next morning they headed up over the mountains at Bruxner Park. They followed an upstream creek, which was later named Taylor's Creek after the boys, and found specks of gold. They checked every 30 metres or so and found the gold pieces had increased. They climbed a ridge beside the creek and found a rock with gold all over it. On the ground around the rock was gold pieces. They gathered over 100 ounces off the ground, and the next day they staked out a claim. Then they hurried to Grafton to register it. The Taylor boys later sold their claim in Sydney for £20,000, and the buyers resold it for £40,000. The Beacon Company was formed. About 400 lived at the village. A very capable man by the name of William Crabb was put in charge of the mine. He was called Captain, because it is the English custom to call the mine manager captain. The mine was north of Karangi, about halfway to Bucket Creek and quite remote. Houses and huts were built, plus a butcher shop, 2 stores, a school with 50 pupils attending, billiard room, a dance hall, as well as stationery stores. There was tennis courts and a cricket oval also put in, a hotel and a doctor's piece who set up a surgery. The mine band was given a hall and instruments plus a paid professional conductor. The hotel dining room required men to wear coats. There were single men's huts and another eating house for them. The mine was bringing in about 30 ounces of gold a day, which is about the size of a hen's egg. The mine had its own electricity. It had lit streets and lighting at the mine. About 400 lived at the village. The nearest policeman was at Bellingen, so Captain Crabbe got the men together and told them to elect a committee to deal with problems. In 1897, 8,916 ounces of gold was mined. In all, the mine produced over a tonne of gold, but in 1899 the company closed, soon after the reef was lost. Robert Taylor explains to George England the layout of the Beacon Mine village. We decided to have a look at a mine at Nana Creek. It was over 30 years since Col had been to this mine. Col Grant and Dave Bennett go searching for the Ulu Mine.
I'm staying all the time because there's so much of it there.
Col explains how this mine was worked over 120 years ago. We did find the Ulu Mine. Thanks to Col's experience and knowledge, it would have been very easy to miss it. The topsoil has fallen down over the years and is slowly filling up the entrance. Dave goes in first. Inside the mine, and there are plenty of bats. They seem to fly right at your face. You got an eerie feeling in the mine that you were being watched.
Time actually. I think it might have been put straight as it. That's good.
The boys went about 400 feet into the shaft. funny, but being in a gold mine, you are always on the lookout for gold.
Pieces out.
Yeah.
A big danger in an old mine is the vertical shafts, which are quite deep.
How deep does that go?
About 40 feet down.
And he's having trouble, and he's the skinny bloke.
Take it into lead country.
Getting out was nearly as difficult as getting in. The Red Hill was a problem for the Urara Valley settlers. The hill was very steep, and many of the farmers carried their supplies up the hill on their back, and some of them went all the way around the Wedding Bells forest via Moonee. The gold boom was the reason Karamba became the shopping centre for the district. There were many farms in the valley, there was timber getters and the booming gold mine. Tom Martin opened his hotel in Karamba in 1900. The first post office opened in 1908. The butter factory in 1902 was producing 6 tonne of butter a week. Tom Martin had left the hotel but took it back over and built a 2-storey hotel in 1909. A police station and a courthouse was built, and the mining warden's office was also moved to Karamba. Karamba had been first settled in 1886. It was now a busy, important centre. In 1898, the last load of sugar had left Coffs Harbour. People were moving to Coffs hoping to settle on farmland. The gold mines and the timber getting provided lots of employment. The harbour was the gateway to this exciting new area of New South Wales. There was 120 residents in Maxwell, and by 1906 there was 500 people in Coffs Harbour and surrounding districts. "400 ships a year, or 8 a week, took on passengers and goods at the jetty. By 1909 the population was 1,500. The Pier Hotel was the focal centre of Jetty Town. The Pier Hotel was built in 1905 and a number of houses were being erected. In 1909 a butter factory was opened on the corner of Edgar and Mildura Streets. Milk was brought in from the district dairy farms. The jetty was a hub of activity, especially Harbour Road. In 1904, G.W. Nichols built a sawmill near the Pier Hotel. Sadly, Mr. Nichols died the next year and the mill was bought by the British Australian Timber Company. The British Australian Timber Company became known as BAT, B-A-T. They decided to build a bush tram line, which would run from the jetty to Bucker Creek via Bruxton. steam engines had been used for a number of years in farming, and it wasn't until the 1900s that they began to use these huge machines in the Coffs Harbour area. They were used mainly to tow wagons of timber. They worked well on flat, dry country, but wet or steep country made them difficult to use. In June 1904, this traction engine exploded while ploughing in England. It was remarkable that only one worker was killed. The machine ended up in 10 pieces and parts were found up to 450 feet away. There was good progress in the district, with Corambo becoming a main centre. Coffs was now starting to develop in the early 1900s, and new stores were built. John Moorhead had taken over James Marl's store. A courthouse and police station were built on the Jetty Road in 1906. That saved going to Corambo for court hearings. The people were proud to open the newly built School of Arts in Coffs. The Corambo Brass Band played for the event. Halfway through the 1900s, Coffs Harbour started to really grow. In 1902, women were given the right to vote. The number entitled to vote then was 27 in Coffs, 7 at the Jetty, and Bonville with 33. Robert Bray had a store on Corambo Road, not far from Moonee Street. He built a new store after the Church of England moved to the top of the hill to where they are still. Bray's new store opened in 1908. Mr. Bray was a popular identity who paid the brass band to play in the street on Saturday nights. He organised the Bray Picnic Day each year and spent his Christmas holidays camping at Park Beach. In 1920, he sold out to William and Charles Cox, who were both World War I returned men. In the mid-1890s, the Cricketers Arms Hotel was built, and it was the very first hotel in Coffs Harbour. It was built across from the showground and on the land where the forestry workshops are now. Before the 1900s, the hotel was moved to the Fitzroy Hotel site. Murdoch McLean took over the Cricketers Arms Hotel and then built the Fitzroy Hotel. The Fitzroy Hotel became a leader in the use of electricity. About 1910, it was able to boast about being splendidly lit throughout with electricity. The electricity was generated in a shed behind the hotel, and it also supplied businesses in Moonee and High Streets. The Pier Hotel also had electricity, which was supplied from E.W. Smith's generator. In the 1900s, dairy farms were being developed, and most farms had a few cows and pigs and poultry, but they began to build up their herds. The cream was separated by letting the milk stand for 24 hours, and the cream was then scooped off the top. William II from the Arara Valley developed a method to hand harvest grass seed. It became a worthwhile venture. In 1893, a school was built at Karora for a cost of £26. This was the first public school, but over the next 10 years, a number of new schools were built. sawmill was operating at Geelong on the eastern Dorrigo Plateau, and a store built there, although hawkers and delivery carts serviced this area. Bullock teams brought timber and logs down the mountain to the jetty at Coffs. Timsvale was growing and a number of sawmills were operating on the plateau. Bullock teams had played a very important role in the development of Australia, but their days were numbered as different forms of engines were starting to be used. Bullock teams had been used since 1795 in Australia. They were slow and could only travel at walking pace. Some bullock drivers would yell and shout orders to their teams, but then there were others who said nothing and still had full control. Bullocks were much cheaper to buy and feed than horses. They were also more dependable in difficult circumstances than horses. Before the 1900s, horses and coaches were the main way people were transported on land. Steam power would soon power winches and rollers, boats, trains and power generators. It was even tried in cars and trucks. Steam power had a huge impact on the timber industry. Steam was used to drive sawmills, to power huge winches in the bush and to move logs to the sawmill by railways. The Macleay Valley, Maxwell, Barraville, Bellinge and Repton all used the river to move their timber. Without a river, bullock teams did the job. The Bellinge Syndicate Company used a winch, a traction engine and a steam-powered sawmill. The winch was used to get timber 3,000 feet down the mountainside. It took two bullock teams 5 weeks to drag the huge steam winch up the mountainside and get it into the right position. The mill was in operation from 1910 to 1925. The timber cutter would fall the tree, cut it to length, and then clear a track for the bullocky to get to the logs and sneak them out. The timber millers were also not happy trying to get their timber down steep, rough, narrow roads, and they were continually getting bogged. On the eastern Dorrigo Plateau, there were 7 tramways in operation. The Brooklana mill began operating in May 1914 and used horses to pull their logs on rails from the bush and then horses to take sawn timber to Coffs, which took 2 days. They closed in 1928. Cascade initially hauled logs from the surrounding forest with a huge steam winch that was based at their mill. The mill was burnt down and was rebuilt in 1933. The Cascade mill had 2 Fordson rail tractors to haul the log trucks. The Briggsvale tramway was built in 1925. It was built right from the start for steam engines and was operating for 15 years. There was 12 bridges on the line. Logging camps were set at equal intervals along the line. The A-class Climax locomotive came from Fraser Island in Queensland. 2 loads a day came back to the mill, and that was doubled when the night shifts were also working. The Timsvale Tram Line supplied 2 sawmills, Tom Tims's hydro mill and the Timsvale Timber Company's mill. Guy Cameron drove the 4-wheel drive Fordson rail tractor the whole time it was in operation. Steel rails were used on the bends. The line was used until 1936 when tractors and log trucks took over the job. On the coast at Woolgoolga, there were two quite long bush tram lines. The Great Northern Timber Company owned one line and the British Australian Timber Company owned the other one. The British Australian Timber Company had built a timber mill in 1888. The Great Northern Timber Company was reported to be the largest hardwood timber mill in Australia. That was around 1910. The Coffs Harbour Timber Company's tram line from their northern sawmill took their timber to the Boambi Bridge, where it was loaded onto the North Coast rail truck. Their southern mill had a tram line that went to the Promised Land near Bellingen and ran to the North Coast Railway at Archerville. This was quite a long line which had a sawmill at Crosmer Glen. The British Australian Timber Company had bought the G.W. Nichols sawmill at the jetty. They were managed by Dalgety and Company Limited. They built a bush tram line which ran across the Coffs Creek, along the beach and then over Macaulay's headland. It then crossed the Grafton Road and climbed the steep range at Bruxner Park. They brought in a powerful Shay locomotive for the steep climb. The present-day road to Bruxner Park is the same road taken by the tram line. A steam winch was also used in the bush by the BAT mill. The mill was closed in 1914. On the coast, the bush tram lines were closing, although the Eastern Dorrigo lines would be used for another 20 years. There was change happening to many things. The bullock teams, which had been the nation's heavy workers, their days were coming to an end. A new machine called a truck was being seen more and more. Although bullocks were cheaper and easier to feed, the horse was faster and could be ridden as well as useful to pull carts and coaches. Every country farm had a horse. The first horses to come to Australia were 2 stallions and 5 mares. They were with the first fleet in 1788. The horse population grew from them. There were 70 horses by 1800. Times were happy with work for everyone. The Coffs Harbour and jetty areas were the main centres. Houses were being built. There was plenty of dances, picture shows and entertainment for everyone. The dreaded fire. At 2:30 a.m. in the morning of Sunday the 13th of December 1914, the fire bell was clanging. The Pier Hotel was well alight. The fire brigade arrived but could do nothing as they had no water. By 5 o'clock that morning, The hotel and 14 shops were completely destroyed. A young girl, Mary Hardy, had seen the light from the flames. She ran along the street, waking people in the Pier Hotel and the residences at the shops. Three weeks after the terrible jetty fire, the BAT mill, which wasn't being worked at the time, was completely burnt down. The fire was first seen at 4 a.m. The same month, the Arara post office and shop was burnt down. A blaze destroyed 5 shops in Barraville and 3 sawmills were destroyed by fire on the eastern Dorrigo. It was suspected the fires were deliberately lit. The Beach House was another hotel in Orlando Street, not far past Treasure Island Shopping Centre. Rebuilding the shops and Pier Hotel began almost immediately. Within 12 months, the jetty was back in order with a brand new Pier Hotel and shops. Britain declared war on Germany, and Australia has naturally declared it will join the mother country in defending her shores. 70 million people were involved and 15 million people were killed. Young men joined the army. Some had already fought in the Boer War. There were a number of recruit marches. Germany was a big buyer of Australian timber, and shipping difficulties to friendly countries caused a big drop in timber production. The North Coast Railway had begun, but still there was a shortage of jobs. Germany surrendered on November the 11th, 1918. It became known as Armistice Day. There was a lot of joy and celebration in Coffs Harbour. There were people singing in the streets, and a public holiday was proclaimed. Balls were held as each party arrived back home. This was mixed with sorrow and sadness for those who were not going to return and for their families. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
gazing east upon the sea is the gem of all our northern coasts, a home for you and me. For whenever I gaze from Bronx to Park, looking out upon the land, I can see the beauty of our home shining bright against the sand. I've seen a lot of foreign countries and outback places I've been, and you'll know that I will never leave Coffs Harbour by the sea. The ocean is clear as the sky above as sailing ships sail by. Fishing trawlers are tied up tight, waiting for the morning light. And spreading to the north and south as the highway winds along, folks do travel from other lands to enjoy our golden sand. I've seen a lot of foreign countries and outback places I've been, and you'll know that I will never leave Coffs Harbour by the sea.
Forecasters for warm to very warm conditions for the next 2 or 3 days, with winds from the northeast and an expected top today of 35 degrees. What a great day for the beach, for picnics or for a drive to the mountains. Either way, enjoy beautiful Coffs Harbour by the sea.
I've seen a lot of foreign countries and outback places I've been, and you'll know that I will never